The iPad mini 6 had some distinct advantages over the iPad Air 4, but now that we have an updated and more powerful iPad Air 5, can the Mini 6 still compete? The first thing that most people are going to consider is the size. The iPad mini 6 features an 8.3-inch display, while the iPad Air 5 has a significantly bigger 10.9-inch display. We'll get to how this impacts watching content, gaming, and productivity later on in this video, but clearly the Mini gets the edge when it comes to portability. It's smaller, it's lighter, but I do want to point out that I still end up having to put it in a bag, so it's not a huge advantage, although it does take up less space and it adds less weight. When it comes to the actual ergonomics of holding and using both devices, the iPad Air 5 offers a larger display, which is better for watching content and for multitasking. On the other hand, the Mini is super comfortable to hold for longer periods of time, and I absolutely love gaming on it. And when we get to the gaming session, you'll see that it's actually going to come down to the types of games that you play. As far as the actual quality of the displays, both are Liquid Retina. The iPad Air 5 has a 10.9-inch display with a resolution of 2360 by 1640 and 264 pixels per inch. The iPad mini has a smaller 8.3-inch display with a slightly lower resolution of 2266 by 1640, but a much higher pixel density of 326. What's strange is that both displays have a maximum brightness of 500 nits, but when I actually use them, for some reason the iPad Air 5 seems brighter, and it also seems more saturated and like it has better contrast. In both cases, we're getting 60 Hz displays, so Apple is still keeping the 120 Hz for the two iPad Pro models. Now, personally, I would have really liked to see 120 Hz on the iPad Air 5, especially because other manufacturers offer this feature in similarly priced tablets. Now, overall, I like the iPad Air 5 display a little better, and I want you to consider what types of things you actually plan on doing before you make your choice. The slightly higher resolution on the iPad Air 5 didn't really make a major practical difference in how I was able to use it, but the actual size of the display did. When watching video, I was getting a significantly larger image. When working with various productivity apps or browsing the web, I could see more on the screen at once without having to scroll, and then of course things also looked bigger. The Mini, with its smaller form factor, was great for mobile gaming, and it was also much more convenient when I wanted to read in bed while laying on my side because it's much more comfortable to hold. Ultimately, even though I think the Air has a better display, this is a case where I would consider how and where I plan on using this tablet and then choose based on which size is better for what I need, rather than choosing based on the absolute best image quality. As far as the actual design, both iPads are made of machined aluminum. They have squared off edges, small bezels, and rounded corners. The most noticeable difference is that the volume up and down controls are on the side of the iPad Air 5, whereas on the iPad mini 6, they're at the top. And that's because Apple had to keep the side of the iPad mini clear for storing and charging the second generation Apple Pencil. For biometric authentication, both devices use Apple's new Touch ID, which is incorporated into the power button. Both iPads have a USB-C port at the bottom for charging and for connecting to accessories, but the port on the iPad Air 5 supports faster data transfer of up to 10 gigabits per second. And it supports external displays of up to 6K resolution. This isn't really going to matter to most users, but if, for example, you're someone who transfers files from something like an extremely fast SSD, then you'll benefit from this upgraded port. Rounding out the design, both iPads have 4 speaker grills, but they actually only have 2 speakers, one on each side. The speakers have pretty good audio quality considering the size of the iPad, but I'm going to give the edge here to the iPad Air 5. If you want to use wired headphones or a wired headset, then you'll need to get a USB-C to 3.5mm adapter or a hub, because neither of these comes with a headphone jack. Now let's talk about the camera systems, where the two iPads are virtually identical with one exception. On the front, both iPads have a 12-megapixel ultra-wide and both offer center stage. If you haven't seen this by now, it's a feature that uses this ultra-wide camera to track a subject as it moves through the frame, and then zoom in and out to make sure that it's properly framed. I have to admit that at first I thought it was somewhat of a gimmick, but now that I've used it for a few months, it really does make video calls look and feel more dynamic. On the back, both iPads have a wide 12-megapixel camera with a 5x digital zoom and Smart HDR3 for photos. but surprisingly, only the Mini 6 comes with a flash. Personally, I don't use the rear-facing cameras on my tablets very often for anything other than scanning documents because I have better cameras on my phone and it's much more convenient to use. But if you do plan on using these cameras, the iPad Air 5 should have slightly better image quality because of the new ISP or image signal processor on the M1 chip. We're going to talk more about this chip in just a bit, but first let's take a look at accessories. Both devices are compatible with the second generation Apple Pencil, which pairs, charges, and is stored on the side of each iPad. The feel of the Apple Pencil is the same with both iPads, and since both have fully laminated displays, there is no air gap, and the tip of the pencil actually looks like it's touching the content that's being created. When it comes to using a keyboard case, there is no question that the iPad Air 5 is the way to go. It's compatible with Apple's smaller Magic Keyboard, and there's a lot of great options from manufacturers like Logitech and ESR. I have actually seen a keyboard case for the Mini, but it was very small and uncomfortable to type on, so if you plan on getting a keyboard case, definitely go with the iPad Air 5. Now let's get to processing power, where Apple made a huge splash by giving the iPad Air 5 the same M1 chip that we have on the 11 and 12.9-inch models of the iPad Pro. The iPad Mini 6 comes with the A15 Bionic chip, so let's quickly look at how they stack up and then talk about the real-life implications. Very quickly, for single-core performance, I got 1730 for the iPad Mini versus 1740 for the iPad Air 5, and for multi-core performance, I got 4320 versus 7220. So we're seeing similar single-core performance, but then significantly improved performance for tasks that would benefit from multi-threading. So how will this actually impact your day-to-day use? So the truth is that for most users, it won't, at least not anytime soon. The A15 Bionic is already more powerful than what the vast majority of users need, so unless you're rendering video or performing other resource-intensive tasks, your everyday use with both devices will be virtually identical. What you are getting with the M1 chip on the iPad Air 5 is additional headroom in terms of performance. So as apps and games become more advanced and iPadOS continues to evolve, you have more room to grow. So if you want to choose the more powerful iPad, that would be the iPad Air 5 with the M1 chip. Now, what about the actual gaming experience? Is there a meaningful difference there? The answer is yes, but it may not be in the way that you think. In terms of actually being able to play the game smoothly, I did notice a difference. I played PUBG, Asphalt, Genshin Impact, and several other less demanding games, and all of them ran great. The iPad Air 5 does come with 8GB of RAM versus 4 on the iPad Mini 6, so again, we're getting more resource for games to use, but so far it hasn't made a significant difference. Now keep in mind that just like with processing power, having more RAM is never going to be a bad thing as time goes on. When playing PUBG, both iPads can go up to balanced for graphics if I want extreme frame rate, and then I can move to Ultra HD graphics and Ultra frame rate. Now the difference that I mentioned in terms of gameplay actually had to do with the ergonomics. So the iPad Mini 6 is smaller, it's lighter, so it's extremely comfortable to hold for longer periods of time, and my hands weren't getting tired after a few hours of PUBG. It's also really convenient to bring with me if I want to game on the go. The iPad Air 5 has a larger display, so naturally everything looks bigger, and the gaming experience is more immersive. It's also easier for me to see small details like someone peeking from behind a rock or a tree or any other subtle movements. For a different type of gaming experience, I also connected my Xbox controller to both iPads and then streamed some games with the Xbox Game Pass app. The gameplay itself was smooth and responsive on both devices, but I'm going to give the edge to the iPad Air 5 because the larger display is just more fun for this use case. Now, whether or not you plan on gaming, battery life is always going to be an important factor. Now, both devices are rated for up to 10 hours of surfing the web on Wi-Fi or watching video, and then 9 hours when using cellular data. My personal experience with both has been pretty similar, and like with any other device, it depends on what I'm doing. So unless I sit down to play hours of games, or if I edit and render a long video, I can get through a full day of typical use with both. And the typical day for me includes watching YouTube videos, reading and answering your comments, spending some time on social media, and then browsing the web, and doing some administrative work for the channel, like replying to emails or working with sponsors, that kind of stuff. Now, on the other hand, if I sit down and play PUBG for a couple of hours, that's going to take a big chunk out of the battery life of both. Now, at least in my case, I always have 15 or 20 minutes during the day where I can charge my iPads, so it hasn't really been an issue. And when I'm on the go, I pretty much always have a power bank with me because I do not like worrying about battery life. Also, now that I have the iPad Air 5, I'm working on an updated battery drain test for all the current iPads, and I'll publish it as soon as it's done. Another important area to consider when choosing between these two is multitasking. Now, both come with iPadOS 15, so in terms of the actual multitasking features, they're identical. But personally, I prefer the iPad Air 5 because it has a higher resolution display, and the display itself is also bigger. Now, another area where I feel like the iPad Air 5 has the advantage is with Sidecar. If you're not familiar with Sidecar, it's an Apple feature that allows you to use your iPad as an additional display for your Mac, your iMac, or your MacBook. And I end up using it at home and for multi-display setups when I'm on the go. It's probably no surprise that I'm going to give the edge here to the iPad Air 5, again because the larger size makes it a more useful external display. Now, before I get to my recommendation, let's talk about the price because that's always a consideration. Now, I'm going to use the official prices from the Apple Store, but you can usually find better prices by using the links in the description. And also, let me know in the comments section if the prices are different where you live. Now, both iPads are offered in 64 and 256 gigabyte options. The iPad Mini 6 sells for $499 and $649, and the iPad Air 5 sells for $599 and $749. Both are also offered in cellular models with 5G. Now, if you watch my iPad Air 5 review, you know that I think it should have been offered with 128 gigabytes and 512 gigs, but it is what it is, and you get the same amount with both iPads. Alright, so then how do you choose? The iPad Mini 6 is smaller, it's lighter, it's more portable. The A15 Bionic chip has plenty of processing power for the vast majority of users. It has the same camera system, but with the addition of a flash, has the same multitasking capabilities, and it's compatible with the second generation Apple Pencil. The iPad Air 5 has a larger display, it's a better option for multitasking, it's compatible with some really nice keyboard cases as well as the second generation Apple Pencil, and it has a more powerful chip with twice the RAM. Now you should see how the iPad Air 5 compares with the Samsung Tab S8. Click on my face to subscribe. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.